Yeah, because you're terrified.
Yeah.
You're terrified of that relationship being broken, which is a very real fear for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so you'll do whatever you have to do. You'll quote Bible verses. You will you will go above and beyond. You will sacrifice yourself. You will put yourself in harm's way in order to keep that relationship.
Yeah.
And so that really is not quote unquote loyalty.
Right.
You know, when I think of the word loyalty, it's I view it in a much different perspective. But where I'm so committed to a person that to walk away from that I couldn't live with myself. So I think that can have an air of codependency, but it's not because I'm necessarily needing something. It's because, quote unquote, I'm loving so deeply. And that's probably been a problem in my life because I'll get so connected to someone. I just love them so much. So to not have that relationship or not be loyal to that relationship is very hard for me. So it has to be pretty dramatic for me to walk away from a relationship. And one way that I've been able to do that is when I have seen abuse of power or usury or someone deliberately taking advantage. So
Like
when I
falsehood.
Pardon?
Falsehood.
Yeah. Like it is, injustice is an abuse of power. So it's like someone being so good at manipulating and actually using their platform, their voice, their relationship, whatever, to continue to take. So whenever, what this podcast is all about, an exchange of life. So whenever it's one-sided, there is probably usury there because it's one-sided. So like if I become the one giving it all, but there's nothing in return, then I recognize this is not quote unquote healthy loyalty.
Yeah. And I think,
And there could be seasons of time for that because I know like all of us had COVID at once. This was like 2 years ago. And sometimes I would call, I had
year ago,
nothing.
actually.
I didn't have COVID.
No, she didn't have COVID, but I mean, when I had it, it really affected my mind. So I would be in contact with Katie sometimes, and it was just like, I was good for nothing. Like I had nothing to offer, you know? And so after I recovered, then I'm just saying that there are seasons of time in loyalty where you have you're not receiving anything.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
I just want to make that delineation because I think one of the true characteristics of loyalty is the fact that you stick it out.
Yeah.
You work it out when it's tough, when it's difficult,
yes,
when it's not the easy thing to do. And, you know, I'm big on definitions. So to be loyal means to have an unwavering allegiance or devotion to a person or a thing.
That's good.
So if you're so quick to jump ship at the first sign of trouble, how loyal are you?
Right.
And so the whole essence of loyalty is this unwavering commitment.
So good.
Okay, so I think sometimes, I'm not saying from the person that asked this, I'm just saying sometimes people were like, well, it's toxic because it's costing me something. No.
Yeah.
The whole
it's real because it's costing you something.
Yeah, it's a real thing because you're laying down your life for someone else. Yeah. So the question really is, when does loyalty become toxic? Because we know that loyalty is going to cost you something.
Yes.
But when does it become toxic?
So good.
And toxic means it means hazardous. It means poisonous. It means harmful. May cause death or serious debilitation. Now that's talking about toxic waste, but it could be death of relationship or you know, it's going to jack you up. Okay, it's poisonous. It's not good. So toxic relationships are quite the opposite of what this podcast is about. Right. The exchange of life. And so sometimes many people stay in unhealthy relationships because they are unhealthy themselves.
Yeah.
going to say that again. Many people stay in unhealthy relationships because they are unhealthy themselves. Why is that? Because they're unaware that it's unhealthy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See, when you are unhealthy, you will think that's business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're in a toxic, quote unquote, relationship, if you are unhealthy, you won't realize it's toxic.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step to recognizing if something is toxic is for you to have an awareness of health and life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for you to get healing, for you to
so good,
even be around relationships that are life-giving. And then when you realize what health is, then you can say, actually, this is not healthy.
Yeah.
This is actually toxic.
And typically our unhealth, we match accordingly. So that's why a lot of times there's a codependent person with an addict.
Yeah.
Because one is leaning on one side and the other is leaning on the other side. And that's why there's recovery groups for addicts and for codependents who are with addicts, because that unhealth, we don't see it. We're trying to fix the other person's unhealth, but it's actually stemming from our own issues. And it's just human. We're all trying to get our needs met in various ways. And that can also often lead to relationships that are unhealthy.
Yeah.
Or loyalties that are unhealthy.
I believe that the health of a relationship is determined by what is exchanged.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're exchanging toxic thoughts, toxic expectations, guess what? That relationship is going to be toxic. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that we're talking about loyalty, but I want to make the difference because I want to make a clear difference, because loyalty, like I said, is going to cost you something.
Yeah.
So I don't want you to think, well, this is toxic because it's not meeting every single one of my needs. Like I said, there was a moment in our relationship where I was good for nothing, right? I had nothing to offer.
But you said a moment.
Yeah, a moment.
That's the key.
And we can recognize that because in general, I think we try to. We're healthy people, right? So we're able, like you as a healthy person, can say right now COVID is messing with his brain, right? And
well, actually, I remember at that time, like you would call and you'd say, we have to do this, we have to do this. And I said, right now, your greatest thing that you could do is to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And so it was recognizing, even for you, to say this is okay for you not to be contributing for this moment.
Yeah.
This is not all the time. This is a moment.
And that's what that is, a quality of loyalty, right?
Yeah.
To be able to say, like, this relationship right now is kind of like not the best, or it's, if it stayed in that, then it could have been toxic.
Yeah.
But being able to recognize that there might be seasons where it's not the easy thing to do, or so I just think that's really important to understand. I think you also need to understand that you can be loyal to a person, but not their junk.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Okay. So as you become healthier, I can be loyal to who a person is, but not join in on the mess.
Yep.
Very good.
So
that
I don't want
you
someone
can
to
love
think
them deeply, but recognize that you can't trust them in the area to like give your heart.
Well, and also
that's boundaries,
I
right?
can love them
exactly.
deeply and I don't have to fix them.
Right.
Which for me is something I have to remind myself of.
Yeah. So the question is, when does loyalty become toxic? But I don't want someone to think, well, because it's toxic, I need to get out of the relationship. In some relationships, yes, you should. If they're abusive, like we can't talk about every scenario in this podcast, but I don't want you to look and say, well, there's an aspect of our relationship that is toxic, so I need to get out of here.
Like they have an expectation from me so that it makes it toxic. And that's just that's not true.
Exactly.
Like they're always asking me to take out the garbage. Every Tuesday they ask me to take out the garbage. This is so toxic. Well, no, it's called relationship.
Like I tell my kids sometimes, that's life, people.
Yeah.
That's called responsibility. I don't say it to my 9-year-old, but my oldest son is like, that's what being an adult is, you know?
Yeah.
It's just life, man. And it's funny, like if my youngest is doing something that annoys the older one, I'll hear him say, well, that's just life, man. Like, I'm like, I realize everything I say is repeated. Even if it's not in great context, it's like, you know. Anyways.
I think there's certain things that would go to be able to define what toxicity is in terms of relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think where there is deliberate manipulation, you know, guilt trips.
And you won't know that if you're not healthy. So that's what I'm saying.
Right.
The healthier you are, the more you'll be able to recognize the manipulation.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, there are people that are very narcissistic. It's all driven about them, and they're very, very skilled at causing people to feel responsible to meet their needs. But even
they might not realize they're doing it. It's so wired in them at that point. It's become an automatic response.
The more fearful we are, the more needy we are, the more we're focused on ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think we all maybe have moments in our life, if we're sick or something like that, you're facing something to where it's such a challenge or there's fear there that you focus on your need. But I'm really talking about narcissistic behavior or manipulative behavior, that they're doing everything in their ability to manipulate and control you to get you to do and be and give and sacrifice for them. They do all the taking and you have to do all the giving. Something is wrong with that picture.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you throw the relationship away, but you don't get involved in their junk. I used to not know how to handle a manipulator. Mm-hmm. And so let's say, we're pastoring. There were some people that were master manipulators. And I just began to recognize that the moment I see manipulation, I didn't even address it, because then you have major drama, major crisis. I just ignored it. I would not, and I have learned not to allow myself to be manipulated by anyone. Mm-hmm. I will love them, but I will not engage in response to their manipulation.
Yeah.
And so I think there's certain things that we might, as you said, we don't throw the person away, but at the same time, we don't get involved in those toxic behaviors. And because then we support people in that.
We talked about this in our covenant question, or was that an episode? But we talked about it when we talked about covenant relationships. But it is really countercultural in our society to be committed in a relationship.
Yeah.
And so this is my perspective, but I think sometimes counseling type, or like I mental health and I talked about being healthy, but sometimes if people will create these things so that they could be more self-centered. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, loyalty can be toxic, so I should not be loyal at all because I need to avoid all toxicity at all costs. Mm-hmm. Well, no. Well, then you're missing it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think in our society, it leans more towards you being about you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And where loyalty and covenant and partnership and laying down your life for your friend is valid, and it's powerful, and it's helpful, and it's empowering.
It's the way of the kingdom. And I think that's always going to be the clash of the way of the kingdom versus the way of this world, that the kingdom requires that choice, that sacrifice, that laying down your life. It requires that. And the world is not going to understand that.